everyone knows a typical diabetic or a person with hypertension who ends up with more medications as time goes by and higher dosages. Like if the medications were so effective, then why are they taking more of it over time? It's because it's not solving the root cause.
Dr. Morales, how did you find carnivore?
Well, that's a bit of a long story, but let's see. It started right after med school. I finished med school, and let's say that my passion for learning had died out during med school. It was never-ending presentations, reading textbooks about topics that a lot of times didn't really interest me. Like because we also had a lot of filler subjects, not just main subjects like biology, anatomy, clinical pathophysiology, and stuff like that. So let's say after med school finished, my passion for learning was rekindled. I had more free time for myself. I mean, I was taking care of three children, so maybe not exactly a sabbatical per se, but I had more free time. So I started reading. I have a passion for history, so history led me to Austrian economics. Austrian economics led me to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin then led me to carnivore. So that's when I first heard about it, actually. So, and during my Austrian economics and Bitcoin phase, I also discovered Jordan Peterson. So I remember hearing him talk about the carnivore diet. At that moment, it sounded very extreme to me, like something someone would do, perhaps in the most extreme of circumstances, such as autoimmune disease, cancer, etc. And but the more I went down this Bitcoin rabbit hole, the more I realized a lot of Bitcoiners were indeed carnivores. So like, there's something to this. So then in one of Jordan Peterson's interviews, he interviews Saifedean Ammous, an Austrian economist and also a Bitcoiner. He wrote the Bitcoin Standard. So I love that interview. I read that book from Saifedean, and because in a chapter inside that book, he talks about how food has also been corrupted. I mean, sorry, that's in his other book, Fiat Standard, which I read after the Bitcoin Standard. He talks about how the food guidelines have been corrupted, how fiat has influenced that. And he has a podcast called the Bitcoin Standard Podcast, where he's interviewed people like Professor Ben Bickman, Dr. Sean Baker, people like Paul Saldino has been there, Dr. Ken Berry. So there was a lot of carnivores he was interviewing. So I would hear these doctors talk, these scientists talk, and carnivore just make so much sense. It made so much sense. I was still, though the programming was still strong in me. You know, this no, red meat's going to kill you. Fruits, and you must have at least some fruits and veggies to be healthy. But the real reason I started carnivore, because I was learning about it, I hadn't implemented it yet. The real reason I started carnivore was because of my wife. So my wife, she's from Latvia. I'm from Mexico. She, since her childhood, she's been suffering from migraines. And actually, when she would go with the neurologist to get that checked up, the first two times the neurologist didn't believe her. She thought that my wife was just overreacting, just wanting attention. But as time progressed, it was obvious she was suffering from migraines, and quite incapacitating ones, actually, which only started getting worse as time went by. So this was in 2022 when I started carnivore. But shortly before I began carnivore, her migraines had reached a point where she would be disabled for 3-4 days out of the week. Like she'd be locked inside her room, curtains closed. She couldn't do anything. Like basically, her quality of life was deteriorating rapidly. So she had also been hearing about the carnivore diet as well. And one night she woke me up in tears saying like, oh, because before this we went with neurologists and internists and everything to see what we could do about it. And they would give her medicine after medicine and nothing would work. And then she started having side effects. Oh, interesting. I have talked about this story before. We attributed her like neuropathic type pain or articular pain. We would attribute that to the side effects of the medication she was taking. Although later on, like recently, I'm talking about a few months ago, we're starting to think it was actually oxalates. Now, I'd like to get into that later on, but it really does seem it was an oxalate problem. Anyways, no one could help her. So she was desperate that night when she woke me up and she said, let's just try carnivore, Fernando. I can't live like this. She was suffering from depression. She was going to dark places already. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. Like I was already sold by that moment. Like I had no fear that I was going to die or anything. So it was kind of like the final push I needed. So that got me. We started the next day. we abruptly changed our diet. She also decides to suspend all of her medication as well. So she had a kind of a rough first few weeks, but within 2 weeks, like her migraines gone, like the frequency in which they show up. Well, actually, they only show up when she cheats and goes like into like starts consuming things rich in seed oils, a lot of carbs, dairy. She's seen that also triggers her migraines. Personally, I didn't really have many health conditions or medical problems. I did suffer from irritable bowel syndrome since my childhood. So I'd be, like bloated, a lot of gases, abdominal pain, etc., constipation. But I thought that was life, and a lot of people around me suffer the same thing. So it's like it's just part of living. And I went carnivore, and that just disappeared within like a week or two. Like suddenly, wow, like no pain, all the bloating is gone, and it felt miraculous. But that was just me, something nice. And but what really surprised me was my wife. Like herbal bowel syndrome, no big problem. That's something that as you know, carnivore easily solves. But my wife was apart from her migraines, she was suffering from depression. Like that also like disappeared overnight, and that's when I knew like okay, this is something like this. I was hearing about. I was already sold on it, but after experimenting with it, after trying it out, that's when I felt like wow, this isn't just a fad diet or something that just came out of the blue. I started looking into it more, and it's clearly what we've been eating as a species ancestrally for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. We take into consideration our ancestors. Um, so that got me down that rabbit hole, and then I started my private practice the next year. I was already working in the hospital. I was a paid person, but I didn't have the complete liberty, let's say, to treat patients the way I wanted to. I was working for a public institution at that time and at a private hospital as a surgeon assistant. But I started my private practice the next year in 2023, in the beginning. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to speak about this. I've got to speak about the carnivore diet with my people, with my patients, with about the ketogenic diet at least. And I only start seeing more and more and more results. So like, I think the results speak for themselves because nutritional science, that's when I realized nutritional science is garbage. It's a ton of garbage. Everything that I learned in school, which wasn't much about regarding nutrition, but what little I did learn about nutrition in med school, it was all observational studies and things that were based on nothing, and a lot of time just anecdotes. Like a lot of my colleagues don't even I don't even recall reading any certain articles or studies. Like it was just kind of repeating what the doctors would do in their would write down their presentations. Just because I heard this, I'm going to repeat it. We never really looked into the supposed science.
It really feels like the only thing that's sure about nutritional science is there's no science involved, right?
Exactly, it's all most basically all observational. The little experimental research that is done is not properly done a lot of times, the poorly controlled, and the variables they take into consideration. For example, they compare like two groups: guys who eat perhaps a crappy diet, and then those who eat a crappy diet, but perhaps replace some of that crappy foods for like more oatmeal. You're nothing that compares a carnivore versus vegan, for example. Like the proper science. So yeah, that's one realizes in time. So my fervor, my commitment to this movement, this getting your health back, only grew. And since I had this Austrian economics type of background and Bitcoin background, like I'm very freedom minded. And I think the nutritional guidelines and basically all the advice people get today regarding nutrition, it needs to become more decentralized. It's way too centralized in these corporations and medical associations that receive money from big pharma and big food. And obviously there's a huge conflict of interest in the many studies that are done regarding nutrition, amongst other things, of course. But um, and this is where I always talk about the combination of health and money. You know, you need both to be like have a chance at self sovereignty. Because if you don't own if you're not you don't own your own money, if you don't own because what you work when you get paid, you're exchanging your time for something, in this case money, and this money can then allow you to exchange it can be exchanged for for goods in the future. So basically, when you're not in control of your money, when your money is being inflated away, your basic your time, your work, your effort, your blood and sweat is also being eroded. It's being stolen from you. And when you're in a rat race to like preserve some of that purchasing power, like trying to earn more money all the time because you got to save for retirement and things like that, the last thing you really think about is yourself, as in what to eat. You just got to grind away day by day. So once you feel that the future is perhaps a bit more secured, I think people learn to think more about the now and the consequences that will happen long term. So I think health is very important. That's where I think like Bitcoin, Austrian economics, and carnivore tied together. I think they're very intertwined. But basically, that's my story. I started a YouTube channel shortly after opening my private practice. First of all, it was because I felt I needed something to where I could refer my patients to. Because after we would have like an hour and a half, 2 hour long consultation, they would be bombarded by a crap load of information that they've never heard before, and like they would tell me, "Doc, like it sounded amazing and all, but I I don't remember anything," because they're shocked a lot of times. So the YouTube channel it helps. It gives them a place for them to go back to review everything we talk about in the consultation. But then it started to grow, and I'm like, okay, this looks like a great opportunity to reach people across the world. I started giving online consultations. I've had people from Russia, from Peru, from Spain, uh, all around the world. Mainly, it's Latinos living in the United States, but it's amazing. It's amazing what the internet can do and the freedom of speech, basically. And yeah, that's
Uh,
basically my story, I would say.
so wow. So um, just to follow up on your wife, first, so your wife doesn't suffer migraines at all anymore,
No, well, no, she doesn't. When she's on carnivore, she doesn't. Now,
right?
I really want her to get on the podcast with Dr. Sean Baker. She's been invited to, but she's been hesitant because she hasn't been consistent with the diet. So I think I should explain that a bit more. So we started the carnivore diet in around August of 2022. We followed it all the way up until November. For it was 3 months, 3 consecutive months where we recovered. Like we just felt amazing. Then we broke it for 3 months straight because we went on a trip somewhere else and it was difficult to get food. We went to the south of Mexico where it's kind of hard to get red meat. Um, so for 3 months we broke it, and then December came, January came, and we like broke it completely. Like it was just eating traditional Mexican foods, buñuelos, a lot of this typical Mexican dishes rich in carbs and even seed oils. So we felt terrible. By the end of those 3 months, we said, okay, it's time to go back to the carnivore diet because clearly we felt so much better, and we did. And that's when she got again. She her migraine disappeared again. Her depression went away again. She got pregnant, and she did fantastic the first half of her pregnancy, carnivore, well, ketogenic, ketovore type diet. And then somewhere around the middle end of that pregnancy, she started breaking it because we moved back with my parents. We were moving houses, so we had to come back here. And then when you live with someone who doesn't follow this way of life and in fact thinks you're a bit crazy, it's they make things, and temptation is like there's I always tell my patients there's no worse slide than everything in moderation. If the temptation is right there, you will take it one day or another, especially early on in the journey. So my wife started going back to this, how she should eat before, and then after childbirth, it got even worse. She started even eating more out of line, and then we discovered she started having some autoimmune type problems, um, gastrointestinal ones, even her joints and stuff like that of the like. And then we tried to get her back into carnivore, and then she would start having. This is where I wanted to get into the oxalate part. So, because with oxalates, I don't know how much you've read about oxalates, but it's an insidious toxin in different, and basically in a lot of plants, but especially in things like legumes, spinach, nuts and seeds, etc. She had a lot of that during her early years, her infancy. But then it got worse when she got to Mexico because here there's a lot of like frijoles and tortillas and things. And we would also, before going carnivore, we tried those typical diets to lose weight, where they give you a lot of spinach and these salads, and you're counting your calories. So we had a lot of that, unfortunately. We had peanut butter crazes, also before going carnivore. Like for some reason, we just eat peanut butter nonstop for weeks on end. She got into dark chocolate. Things rich in oxalate, and oxalates are something that accumulates in an insidious way in your body, and it can deposit itself in any tissue in your body, usually in the parts of your body that are most inflamed. So when after pregnancy, when her pregnancy, when she tried to get back to carnivore, she was started. I had already been reading about oxalates. She started getting symptoms that she was getting before going carnivore. Like the reason she went carnivore in the first place with the articular pain, like, whoa, but you're not on your meds. Like we attributed this pain to the meds and things like that. And she suddenly was like the exact same pain plus her autoimmune related issues. And when she was going back into carnivore. So like, why is this happening? Like last time you kind of you eased into carnivore relatively easy. Well, she went to ketogenic diet actually. That was the key thing. She was doing ketogenic. I went carnivore. She went keto. So she was still eating some level of oxalates. So the problem with oxalates is that if you suddenly cut them off, you can suffer from oxalate dumping. And also the curious thing is that it can manifest itself weeks, months, even years after cutting off oxalates. So like no one exactly knows why. So what we did is simply try doing the protocol Sally Norton recommends for controlling oxalate dumping, and she would feel a lot better. So that's how we can kind of confirm that yeah, it's most likely an oxalate related thing. So she was on and off the diet initially before we got into we narrowed it down to oxalates being the problem because she must have tried it like at least 5, 6, 7 times to get back into carnivore. But then she would feel so terrible, she would abort it. And in different ways, maybe introducing fruits one time, then maybe introducing chocolates and things rich in oxalates, which would actually make her feel worse afterwards. Uh, Trying to find the good way to transition. Because that's another thing I recommend my patients. You shouldn't start this abruptly. I recommend you transition slowly to carnivore diet if you come from a highly processed diet, a sad diet. If you've been doing keto for some time, then you can transition to carnivore usually without a problem, unless you've been eating a lot of a keto diet that has been high in oxalates previously. So her migraines are now under control again. We have that under control. She's doing carnivore again this time, but this time we're having a proper control of her oxalates. And yeah, so basically, when she's carnivore, migraine's gone. They come back when she has things rich in seed oils or has some dairy.
It's pretty amazing how you can almost switch these things on and off, and it really is. We go through our whole lives trusting, the advice we get from marketing messages and from, the your local GP and that kind of thing. And then to realize that all of these problems we've been experiencing, really, we can get to the bottom of it just by testing and kind of, all right, let's take this out and see if I get better. Oh, I am feeling better. That's amazing. And those medications I was taking was really all for nothing.
Yeah, definitely. I have a lot of patients who end up taking medications because of their medications, the side effects of their of their medications, and it's just like a nonstop suffering. It's a cycle that keeps on perpetrating itself. And I tell them, you're not solving the problem. Like a lot of the medications that doctors give, what they do is like cover the problem. They resolve symptoms, but not the root cause. So if you never solve the root cause, things are probably going to get worse over time because everyone knows a typical diabetic or a person with hypertension who ends up with more medications as time goes by and higher dosages. Like if the medications were so effective, then why are they taking more of it over time? It's because it's not solving the root cause. And that's what this diet does. It does exactly that.
Yeah. So, what is the reception like when you introduce this to patients in Mexico? Are they kind of astounded that you would be talking to them about changing their diet so radically?
I think it's mixed. A couple of reasons. Number one, I'm in northern Mexico, so in northern Mexico, las carnes asadas, or having a barbecue, is part of the culture. Like it's fairly common, like for every weekend, for family or friends to get together and just have a barbecue, eat plenty of steak. Of course, they combine it with a cactus and onions and the tortillas and everything, right? But meat is part of our culture here in the north. Red meat. Another thing I've noticed, especially in the older populations, is that here in Mexico, still see the doctor as someone like they see him with respect or as an authority. You know, like he knows what he's talking about. So they kind of tend to listen more. I think in the United States, people are a bit more rebellious, which I think is good. You know, you should question everything. Just because someone has a title doesn't mean that you should like believe everything they say. But that's kind of an element here in Mexico, at least amongst the older populations. And well, that's the thing though. Most of my patients are people over the age of 40 or the age of 50. So they young people rarely come to me. It's obvious because they're young, they don't have any problems yet. Although with time, we're seeing more and more cases of younger patients with diabetes and people in their 20s with diabetes, obviously overweight and obese. But yeah, for now, it's still an older population that I see. So when I talk to them about the carnivore diet, usually it's received pretty well. Some of them are shocked, but don't actually push back or feel like their way of life is being challenged. Because here Mexicans love their tortillas, they love their frijoles, and when I tell them that's a problem, I haven't had any aggressive reactions to that. I've been on the radio so recently twice here in my city, the local radio. The second time I was on, there's a part of the interview where I'm interviewed where people can send a message, text to me directly, and in this interview, I mentioned that oxalates act as a poison. And in one of these comments, they're like, you got to be very careful with anyone who uses such strong words such as poison. It's usually like a red flag and things like that. So that's like the worst of it. Like so far, I haven't had anyone visit my office from the government saying that I got to be quiet or things of the like. I do think I might be one of the only doctors in Mexico speaking about the carnivore diet openly, at least in social media. I haven't found anyone else. There are other doctors in Latin America who talk about a ketogenic type diet, basically ketovore. But they say you have to add some vegetables and maybe some fruits here and there. But carnivore, I haven't really seen any. But the reception has been good so far.
Yeah. How about like, have you spoken to any peers, like other doctors, and what has their feedback been?
Let's see. So when I do speak to some of them, they just give me, they just listen. They're like, okay, awesome. Like that. That's it. That's it. Like again, no aggressive pushback or anything. It's like that's cool, bro. And that's basically it. So I am kind of disappointed, but at least there's no negative, like aggressive pushback.
Right. So it's like, is it almost like you're talking to someone and you feel like, are they really listening to this? Are they really taking this in, or that kind of feeling, or
Yeah, I feel like it goes in through one ear and goes out to the other. Um,
right?
but they've seen me, like they knew me during my med school years, like my fellow colleagues, and I was fat back then. Like I was even obese at one stage. I am okay. So like I don't know. You're in the UK. I don't. I use meters. We use meters here in Mexico. So
Yeah,
I'm a
I'm in
meters
Japan, metrics.
metro. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I'm 1.76 meters tall, and I used to weigh up to like 93 kilos. So that's obesity if you use BMI. I know it's not the most exact metric, but obesity according to BMI. And that was, I mean, yeah, you could see my photos. I look clearly. I actually have a photo here. If you want me to show it, I can share the screen and show it. But they see the difference between back then and now. Like I don't even look inflamed. Like you can actually see my my muscles a bit. I look. I'm not buff or anything, but there's a huge contrast between back then and now. And then I tell them I do carnivore for. I've been doing that for like 21 months now, and they don't even better now. It's like okay, like I have no idea what goes on through their mind, to be honest.
Right. So we're about the same height, and yeah, 93 kilos would be a very uncomfortable weight for me as well. Like, so what are you now? Like 60s, early 70s?
Yeah. Also interesting. So when I went carnivore, I went down to 70 kilos, 71 kilos, and that's where I stabilized after a few months. And then in October of this year, I decided to try out the lion diet. I did a little challenge for 1 month, red meat, water and salt. That's it. And I lost another kilo and a half. Interesting. Because the other thing I consume apart from meat is dairy. So, that could be part of the problem. I lost a kilo and a half. And then in November, I did another little challenge. So I did a 1 day water fast, followed by a 1 day, 24-hour dry fast. No water, no food, no anything. I lost another 2 kilos from that. I weighed myself after the challenge right away, and then I ate and I drank. I rehydrated myself, weighed myself the day after, and I only gained a kilo back. So yeah, right. I haven't weighed myself recently, but I guess around there I was around 67.5, I think, around kilos. I haven't weighed myself again, but it's interesting to play around with these things.
Yeah, it's again, it's really interesting that we are able to manipulate it so easily when you think kind of over the years, you get into this habit of feeling like, well, this is just my destiny. I'm destined to be this weight. I'm destined to be, this kind of body composition, that kind of thing. And it's not really like that. Um, so when you've introduced this to patients, so there's some that have taken this on board and gone, okay, I'm going to do this, and then they come back to you and they've had some pretty good results.
Oh yes, definitely, and it's mixed in terms of sometimes they get side effects, but not because the meat's causing harm. It's because they're detoxifying. The most common problems I've had are those with like abstinence syndrome type things, like when they eat a lot of sugar and then decide to cut it off one day and they start desiring the sugar, but it's a craving. It's like, and they start having palpitations. Tachycardia, you get anxious. Also, oxalates have been those are the two most common things that I've seen with my patients, those who suffer from side effects. And it's usually because they transition abruptly. I tell them, do it slowly, but they want to feel better yesterday, right? So they just jump into it and start feeling bad. But I would say that's like somewhat 30-40% of the cases when they start feeling like this bad, and usually because they do this abrupt change. The other 60% who like do it as I as I tell them to, it's amazing the results. For example, I have a recent patient who hemoglobin 6.5, just barely diabetes, according to the medical guidelines. 6.5 of their hemoglobin A1C, their fasting glucose. I forgot it was definitely above 125. Triglycerides high, typical like diabetic person. She does carnivore for 3 months. Oh, and I told her to get a continuous glucose monitor. That is such a powerful, powerful tool because it teaches them the influence that food has on their sugar levels, or glucose levels. Because during carnivore, especially during the beginning, you're tempted to like, okay, how much is one slice of bread or a piece of pie? So like she told me like during her transition, the first 3 months, like in the first month, she would eat something sweet, and then she would see how that glucose level just spikes to the roof, and then how like let's say after it would come back down again. During some breakfast, she would have just pure meat like eggs, bacon. She would see how her glucose levels stay basically flat or very little increase in her glucose levels. And she told me, okay, so I found out that if I suddenly every now and then have something sweet like a piece of cake, yeah, glucose goes up on the same day, it goes back down. But if I decide to eat nonstop carbs, like to say some party, some reunion here in Mexico, we like big parties, so parties can last a few days. So she said, if I do this for like 2 or 3 days nonstop, it takes me over a week for my glucose levels to go back down. So like this is the power of this tool. So you can clearly see how your body reacts to different types of insults, let's say. And anyways, after 3 months, we redid some lab tests. First of all, she lost a lot of weight. And I tell the patients, weight's not exactly what we should be focused on, especially in the beginning. Uh, your weight can vary a lot, even during the same day. Focus more on your waist circumference. Your pants, are your pants getting loose? Like if you're not losing much weight but you're losing like you have to buy smaller pants, that's fantastic. That's a way better predictor of cardiovascular health than weight alone. So yeah, obviously she was losing weight, yeah, and also her waist circumference was going down. And when her lab test came back, like she had a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7. So that's a significant decrease. Like Ozempic ain't gonna do something like that. This is something that does diet does so much more than the best medications out there without the side effects, that these can cause. Um, so she told me I felt like so energetic, and what caught me my attention the most in this particular patient was that um, she shared a little story. Like, one, as a young person, probably wouldn't see that as something like wow, like something surprising, but she was like in her 60s. Is in her 60s, sorry. She told me that back then, before this diet, I would sit down, and to get back up, I would have to like put my hands on the ground, turn around, and get up very, very, very slowly. And he said one day I was just sitting on the sidewalk, and I had to just get up, and I didn't even use my hands. I just simply used my feet, and I just got up like nothing. And when she told me that, she was like so happy, like wow, like this is amazing. Something that many people would take for granted. She was like, I just got my mobility back. Like she feels that she can do more things and is more active. So like these are the, let's say, the typical stories. But I've had autoimmune patients who also, like, they couldn't control their rheumatoid arthritis with many medications, and they just end up suspending a lot of that because they start feeling better. The pain starts going down, the inflammation starts going down. Um, I had a cancer patient once, but yeah, they don't. A lot of them sometimes don't even follow up. Now, I would like to. I like to hope that it's well, except for the cancer patient, I like to hope that they feel so good that they don't feel they need a a follow up consultation. But you never know. But it's been a very interesting journey, definitely.
So the obvious kind of question that comes from this is, aren't you concerned that you're basically putting yourself out of business?
That's interesting. I thought about that before when hearing doctors talk about this. Before I started doing it myself, like they're gonna have no patients left. But if I do go out of business, I think I would be happy, like because that means that pretty much everyone is metabolically healthy. But having said that, there is so much work to do. So actually, I think it's the opposite. I have a lot of work ahead of me, especially if I'm apparently the only one talking about it in Spanish, at least here in Mexico. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of fear around the carnivore diet. People think they're going to die because they're eating carnivore, eating meat mainly. They think their kidneys are going to just fail on them. So no, I think there's a lot of work ahead. Maybe in the future, definitely, a lot of doctors might be put out of business, because I know, like, Mexico, according to Mexican statistics, the government statistics, Mexico needs like another 200,000 doctors, medical doctors. But in my opinion, if you could make every doctor talk about lifestyle and diet, I don't think you need those 200,000. Who knows? Maybe you'd even have too many doctors. Yeah, because I think medicine is fantastic for treating acute injuries and things like, if if you break a bone, fantastic. If you have a car accident, fantastic. Medicine will save you. But for chronic degenerative diseases, I think medicine has gone backwards. Actually, like it hasn't even stayed stable. I think we're getting worse and worse in treating chronic degenerative diseases.
It's interesting you mentioned about the 200,000 doctor shortage, I kind of I I relate that to, when you hear politicians saying, "Vote me in and I'm gonna build more hospitals," or something like that, and you think, "Well, that's actually the wrong promise to be making." You should be saying, "Vote me in and I'm going to, take care of some of these chronic diseases by educating you properly about lifestyle," or something like that.
Yeah, totally, and that should be the approach, because if you do that, for example, Mexico spends 6% of its GDP goes into treating the consequences of obesity. All the complications that accompany it. So that's a lot. Like Mexico, into its military, puts like a 0.51% of its GDP into its military. So it's like six times more just to treat the diseases caused by obesity. And if we could just focus on the nutrition aspect of it, like I think Mexico could save, the government could save a lot of money, a lot of money. And who knows, it could like bring taxes down even, and get more investment from abroad. Like generally make the economy of Mexico flourish more, because if you have an unhealthy population, it's not going to be as productive as it could be. And I think that's a huge problem. Unfortunately, the guidelines in Mexico are basically the same ones as in the United States. or the ones that the WHO recommends. Slightly tinkered to for the typical Mexican, as in adding more beans and things of the like. But it's not much different. Like I have right here, if you want to ever see it, about what's the recommended diet for the average Mexican. But there's everything that Mexico does nutrition wise is copied from the United States, and I think that's the same story for a lot of countries around the world.
So when you talk about the metabolic state of people, is Mexico kind of comparable to where the US is, with health? Like, is obesity and diabetes running around the same kind of levels?
I don't know the exact statistics of the United States, but I know like there was a survey done recently in Mexico. It finished in 2023. It was run from 2020 to 2003. It's Esanut, it's the name of it. And yeah, they got like a lot of different, they got data from different parts of the country to see more or less what the metabolic health of Mexico is. Amongst the adult population, that's people 20 years and older, found out that around 74.5% of the population is either obese or overweight, and actually it's pretty much half and half. Like half of that group is actually overweight, and half of that is obese. And they also do the same for children. Like, well, from the ages of 5 to 19, it's actually a bit worse. It's 76.9% of this population group is either obese or overweight. So yeah, we're pretty bad. We're pretty bad. And the recommendations they give is like I told you, it's the same thing as the United States. So that's okay if you compare it to the diet that typical Mexican follows, which is ultra processed foods. And actually, in the study, they point that out. Like the problem is most likely ultra processed foods. Uh, the most of that the extra energy that Mexicans are getting from ultra processed foods are in the form of soft drinks. A lot of Coca Cola, for example. I don't know how it is over there where you are, but if you go to a supermarket here, you can find Coca Cola bottles that are like 3 liters. From as far as I know, only certain countries have 3 liter bottles because it depends on the amount
Yeah,
of consumption you have.
I don't think I've heard of 3-liter bottles before. Wow.
We have 3 liter bottles exactly. That's how much Mexicans love Coca Cola. So that's a huge problem, and I agree with that. They also say there's not enough people breastfeeding. I also agree with that. And if you compare like their what the diet they're recommending compared to what the average Mexican eats, yes, I do think the average Mexican would be better, but I don't think that would be the optimal. And I think that's what we should strive for. We should strive for the optimal, the most closest thing to a proper human diet, so, something that a diet that consists mainly of meat, because in this diet that they recommend also it's quite high in oxalates. So like I think that's another thing that's not spoken about much. Everyone talks about seed oils in the carnivore diet, talk about the dangers of fructose, obviously glucose, but oxalates I think it's not spoken as much as it should be, because I really do think that's a big problem. Because when someone's trying to switch to a healthier diet, like the classic things, like spinach and sweet potatoes and all these things, like nuts in season, like people who do paleo, like I'm just gonna eat a whole jar of nuts without any consequences. Like that's why I think oxalates are an important thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think, and also as you're getting older and as these things really take hold, like, and you've got like all this joint pain that's caused by oxalates and that kind of thing, it just feels like this is over for me. And then you're less as you're kind of losing hope, there's less likely that you're gonna be trying other natural ways of getting better, and so the medications just pile on and, the visits to the doctor pile on, and it's just this kind of vicious cycle it's hard to get out of, right?
Oh yeah, truly. And I think it's also even if you do a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet that's more akin to one that's either low in oxalates and high in meat, because of oxalates, you say I'm eating fantastic, but I feel like crap, and they'll attribute it to the diet change. Like they say, it's because I changed my diet. That is the problem. So I think the more knowledge there is out there, the more people understand, the more mainstream make these typical problems known. the more likely the population is to stick with this diet. And I think it can be easily solved. Like I don't think you don't need to talk about oxalates all the time. I think if you just transition slowly to a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet, most of these secondary effects or consequences of your previous way of eating, I think a lot of these consequences can be ameliorated or reduced significantly. So I think that should be like the key takeaway for those doctors or people who just want to, who are maybe not doctors, like just you tried carnivore diet and it worked for you, and you want to recommend it to a friend or a family member. Just transition slowly, and there's plenty of content about how to do that out there. I think that would be like one of the main key points, because that's one of the main key points I do tell my patients. Like this is very important. Transition slowly, and also it's what matters the most is what you avoid. Like meat does not have any magical properties. Like if you continue to eat like the typical American or the typical Mexican, and all you do is add in more meat, you're going to be exactly the same or worse, because the worst combination you can do is a diet high in carbs and high in fat, because you activate the Randall cycle type thing. So you either eat mainly carbs like a vegan, or you eat mainly fat like a carnivore. The problem with the vegans being that sooner or later they're going to develop nutritional deficiencies because of the toxins and anti-nutrients in plants. So carnivores is the way to go, but it's what you avoid that's more important. And it's like Dr. Kim Barry says all the time: seed oils have to go, grains have to go, and added sugars have to go. Like those are the three things you want to take to zero. Again, in the beginning, you go down slowly. What I do tell my patients that they can eliminate right away from the get go are seed oils. Like eliminate all ultra processed food and your seed oils. That's a yes, yeah. And depending on their oxalates, well, I help them there, because you kind of do have to know a bit how to wean off of that carefully. But they're still eating tortillas and things of the like. They can still consume that while they transition. But definitely seed oils. That's something I tell them that has to go away.
I think your approach with the patients sounds really good from the perspective of you're setting expectations a lot up front, which I think is really important, because kind of the food industry and the mainstream medical profession kind of get away with being able to say, "Oh, you see, it's carnivore," or "The carnivore is a problem," because they don't get into the nuance of it, right? So, like you say, you first go carnivore, you jump in, and then you get oxalate problems, for example. It's easy to go, "Well, it's a carnivore diet. That's why I was getting these problems," right? And there's no nuance in that, right? So it's very easy for the mainstream to hide behind. So setting those expectations up front, I think, is very important.
Yeah, it is. It is. You have to know what to expect. That way, you're not shocked by it. And I think you also need to have it helps a lot to have a community, like people you can ask questions to, because if you're alone in this, which was kind of my case, because here in Mexico, again, I don't know anyone else who's been really doing this, especially professionally. I felt kind of alone in this, but again, in the Bitcoin space, a lot of carnivores, so I felt like a lot of support from there. um, I'm trying to do that here in Mexico. I'm trying to create this community. I have like a Telegram group, for example, for those who subscribe to. I have like a tier list in buymeacoffee.com, and it's you have this group. You ask questions. I have patients there, and people who are not my patients as well, who have been doing carnivore for a year, 2, 3 years. How they've reverted even autoimmune diseases. So they're there, and then being able to ask questions there definitely makes you feel more at ease and more confident with what you're doing. Because if you do something with fear, you're not going to do it properly. Most likely, you're not going to do it correctly. For example, again, I know I talk a lot about oxalates, but when you decide to reduce oxalate intake, that has to be a firm decision. Because if you start reducing oxalates and then you start dumping, and then you just try to add more oxalates back in because you want to go back to your previous diet, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel terrible. I think community is very important, and I have plans that I would like to long-term plans. I would like, since I feel northern Mexico is ripe for, I guess, the carnivore diet. Because again, it's part of our culture. I would like to create like conventions. Like a carnivore con. I think like the invite people from all over the world. hopefully maybe one day people like Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Kamberi, Professor Barkay, and just talk about this openly, and so the people, the community here in Mexico, can see that this isn't something that some random guy discovered in his garage. Let's say it's clearly backed by hundreds of, I would say, healthcare professionals as well, but not just healthcare professionals, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world have already been following a carnivore diet, and that it is, in fact, the way to be healthy.
Yeah, I think that community is really important, especially as you say, having so many doctors being able to say, "Yeah, this works. I've had success with this. My patients have had success with this," and then you've got thousands, perhaps millions of people all saying similar things. Just having those stories out there really helps to keep people, I don't know, feeling like, yeah, this is something that can work for me too.
Yeah, and I do see that people who do form a community, people who decide to like join, because I was also organizing meetups in a local coffee shop for those my local patients. I realize that those who come to these community events tend to follow up the carnivore diet even more, and they actually get, usually when they decide to go ketogenic because they're afraid of going pure carnivore. When they start hearing the stories of those who went pure carnivore, they're like, you know what? Yeah, I think I'll try it out. I'll try, and they do that. They do that, and they usually end up feeling better. Those who don't feel like significantly better, they just go back to their ketogenic diet. Nothing wrong with that. Um, but that's, I think, the importance of community. So that's what I'm trying to establish here in Mexico with this carnivore thing. Hopefully, it catches on.
So on that point, how can people reach out to you? How can they find your YouTube channel and other ways to get in contact?
So, like, I have a YouTube channel in Spanish. It's you can find me as at Fernando Morales MD, or just look for me as Dr. Fernando Morales on YouTube. I should show up there. That's for those. I do have another podcast in English where it's not just carnivore diet. I add things about Bitcoin and Oster. You can find me as at Fernando Morales podcast, and either way, you can find links on it on my Spanish channel. So that's in case you want to learn a bit, see the association between carnivore, Bitcoin, and Oster. And on my YouTube channel pages, you can see the links to my other social media: Facebook, X, Instagram. I would love it if people give me a follow on Noster instead. That's where I'm most active. Like, I use my other social media just to repost my videos and stuff like that. But I engage very actively on Noster. You can look me up as Dr. Fernando Morales, and you'll find me there.
Dr. Morales, I'll link to all your socials below in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for inviting me on, and hope to see you maybe in my podcast next time.